Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to engage right now on a topic of opportunity that has been echoing throughout the course of the day as a means of profitability, and it is air cargo as an economic catalyst. Expertly presenting on this theme, please welcome onto the stage Mr. Sanjeev Gadhia. He is the CEO of Astral Aviation. Might we give him a round of applause as he comes onto the stage? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody's still awake and not tired at all. So I'm here to talk to you about a very boring topic, which is the topic of air cargo. But this boring topic has been attracting a lot of attention in the last few months, few years, even this morning. We've heard about the importance of air cargo in the speeches that have actually been made by the Honorable Minister and also by South African Airlines. So there's a lot of momentum, there's a lot of excitement on cargo. And I can also mention that yesterday we had a 6-hour committee meeting talking about cargo. And we had 10 airlines in the table, and it was really exciting to talk about all the opportunities in air cargo. So I am here to talk about air cargo as an economic catalyst, and just to give everybody a flavor of what are the opportunities and what are the challenges in cargo in Africa. So I'd like to start by first talking about why air cargo matters for, okay. So the first point that I'd like to talk about is the importance of the demand for air cargo. And generally, when you look at air cargo, the share of the African cargo market is only 3%. So we only have 3% of the global market for air cargo. But when you look at the growth of the air cargo sector in Africa, it's the fastest growing region in the world with a 7% growth per annum. So that's a very, very significant growth that we're experiencing. But at the same time also, what exactly we are doing at the moment is the continent is home for 18% of the world's population. So we're quite fortunate that almost a fifth of the world lives in Africa, and 60% of that population is below the age of 30. So this is really the most promising consumer market that we are actually having in the world. But at the same time also, we have a situation where 54 countries in Africa, because a lot of people think that Africa is a country, and it's actually a continent of 54 countries, and every country has its own regulations. And there's a lot of fragmentation, and this is really where organizations like AFCFTA, AFRAA are actually working together to make sure that the gap is actually minimized. So when you look at the entire dynamics of cargo, it's no longer about ancillary revenue. It's actually an important part of an airline's profitability. And generally, the air cargo sector contributes to between 14 to 20% of an airline's profitability. So it's really quite important. But at the same time also, there's a lot of requirements for cargo in terms of infrastructure. We really have a lot of problems in a lot of airports in Africa because the infrastructure that is there is mainly for the passenger airlines. So this is the reason why we really need to have more investments in infrastructure and PPPs. So why does air cargo matter for Africa? And I really believe that there are four very, very key areas which are very important. And the first is the African Continental Free Trade Area, which creates the world's biggest consumer market. And one of the areas that we actually see is the importance of air cargo in connecting different parts of Africa. So this is a very, very important part. The second part is quite important, which is the demand for fresh products. And a lot of these are also grown in South Africa, in East Africa. Air cargo is the only way to actually move this to some of the markets in Europe and also in the Middle East. Pharmaceuticals and cold chain, I think we've all learned the experience from COVID-19 that pharmaceuticals and cold chain really depend a lot on air cargo, and this is where the requirements of transporting and storing pharmaceuticals and cold chain items, including vaccines, play a very, very important part in the ecosystem of an airport. And last but not the least is the demand for e-commerce. And it's really phenomenal that our children are actually now preferring to buy everything online. They don't want to go to the supermarkets anymore. They don't want to go to the shopping malls. They want to buy everything from the comfort of their home. And they actually expect it to be delivered tomorrow. And this is really very difficult, especially when you look at the dynamics of the regions like China, Asia, where a lot of this e-commerce products come in from. It takes anything between 60 to 75 days by sea, and it only takes 7 days by air. So we're actually seeing that the future of transportation, the future of consumers' habits is actually all going to be defined by how quickly they can actually be able to reach the hands of the same people who are actually buying it. So this is really the point that we're actually getting to, that it's actually no longer just a service, it's actually an economic infrastructure. And when you look at the graphs, we have a very big advantage in Africa that the volumes of freight that we're actually seeing in Africa is actually much higher than the world average. So this is really phenomenal, and it's really very, very good to see that Africa is leading the way when it actually comes to the growth of air cargo, but yet there are very, very few cargo airlines in Africa. And one of the things that we really need to see is more investments which are made by passenger airlines in developing their cargo products. And a good example is South African Airlines, who today have a very large fleet of passenger aircrafts, but not a single cargo aircraft. And this is really where you see a lot of opportunities in developing the cargo product. When you look at the areas of opportunity for cargo, I believe the agriculture sector plays a very important part, but also the oil and gas and the mining sector is also very, very dependent on cargo, especially for the quick movement of equipment. And a lot of times you're actually seeing a situation where it takes a lot of time to move this by sea. Manufacturing is also quite an important sector which relies on cargo. And last but not the least, e-commerce, which is something that we've actually touched on before. Just like the aviation sector has a lot of challenges, we've also experienced a lot of challenges on the air cargo side. And the reality is that the air cargo sector needs a lot of help from organizations like AFRAA to try and build the value proposition. So when you look at the 5 main areas that we are actually facing a lot of challenges, I believe the single largest problem that we are actually facing is the cost. It's simply too expensive to transport cargo within Africa because of the high taxes that are actually existing on the cargo and the various stages that it is actually evolving in. So we really need to look at the taxes. In some countries, they actually tax cargo very, very heavy compared to the passenger side. And this is something that we're actually working with the various organizations to try and bring down that cost of transportation and the high cost of taxes which comes with it. Regulations, again, is a very major concern. We're actually waiting for the air cargo sector to be fully liberalized, and the only hope that we have is SATM, because SATM will actually bring in a lot of benefits to the air cargo sector, and it will actually open up the whole liberalization, especially when it comes to the 5th and 7th freedom. Connectivity is also a very big problem, just like the way a passenger wants to fly within Africa has to go through Europe and the Middle East. We're also seeing a situation where a lot of cargo, which has to fly within Africa, has to actually go through the hubs of the Middle East or even as far as Paris to make it into Africa. So this is really a very, very big challenge that a lot of consumers are actually facing, especially when they're actually moving cargo from north to south or east to West Africa. Infrastructure, again, a lot of the airports are actually investing billions of rands in investing in passenger terminals, and they're really doing a great job. But it's at the expense of cargo, because the development for cargo infrastructure is very limited, and most of the time you're actually seeing a situation where a lot of the cargo developments are actually taking many, many years to come by. And last but not the least, the competition that we're getting from the foreign carriers is quite extensive. So 80% of the cargo which flies to and from Africa is actually flown by foreign carriers. So only 20% of the cargo is actually flown by African carriers. So this is something that is a big challenge, and we really need to do something about it. But also what we've actually seen in a lot of countries, including South Africa, which is very regrettable, is that foreign carriers are also given fifth freedom traffic rights to fly within Africa. So when you look at the sector Johannesburg-Nairobi, which is the fastest growing sector for air cargo in Africa, you are already seeing 5 foreign carriers who have actually been licensed to fly on this sector, which should not really be the case. So one of the things that we'd like to, of course, appeal to governments is to actually follow the principles of SATM and actually limit 5th and 7th freedom traffic rights only for African carriers, and not really opening them up to foreign carriers, because once you've opened up, it's very difficult to try and take it back. So when you look at the biggest challenge that we have in Africa is the connectivity gap. You have a very, very serious problem, because Africa trades with the world more easily than it is with itself. And this is a reality. Africa only trades 20% within itself, but 80% of Africa's trade is actually outside of Africa. And this is something that needs to change. We really need to be trading more with each other rather than with the foreign countries. And I really believe that that gap has to be solved, and I'm very confident that a part of SATM's objectives is to actually improve intra-Africa connectivity. And I'm looking forward to the day when SATM and the African Continental Free Trade Area will actually boost that to a level of 50% at least. And this is really where we should be looking at. So the biggest opportunity that we are seeing right now is the African Continental Free Trade Area, 3.4 trillion market, the biggest consumer market in the world. It's even bigger than the European Union. It's bigger than India and China put together. And this is the opportunity that we are actually sitting on as far as Africa is concerned. But again, when you look at the air cargo network, you only see one new route for every 5 new routes that actually come up on the passenger side, and that is something that we really hope can actually change. But on the positive side, AFRAA's route network and cargo committee is playing a very important part in bringing the African airlines together so that they can actually be able to connect and work very well with each other. Digitalization, I really won't go too much into details about it, but again, I think the 3 areas where we really have to work very fast is the e-airway bill adaptation, the real-time tracking, and also creating the platforms which are required for digitalization. I've spoken about the e-commerce market, but what we're actually seeing is the fact that the e-commerce market is growing at a rate of 20% every year. And this is really quite a large bit. And the size of the market is almost reaching the $100 billion market. So it's a very, very large market. And when you look at the importance of air cargo in actually meeting the last mile connectivity, it is something that is becoming more and more important, because the consumers are not actually willing to wait for 60 days for their deliveries. They really want it now. And when you look at all the e-commerce platforms like Jumia, and of course you've got Takealot in South Africa, a lot of these very large giants are actually demanding very, very fast fulfillments to actually make sure that the consumers are actually receiving their deliveries on time. Pharmaceuticals and healthcare, and I really believe that the biggest lesson we've learned is from COVID-19, when we really need to make sure that we have adequate stocks of vaccines. And I just remember last week that the DRC made a major announcement that the Ebola, I don't think we can call it a pandemic. I think it's something else altogether. And this is a very big problem, because if there is Ebola in DRC, the world feels that the Ebola is actually all over Africa. So one of the challenges that we will actually have with Ebola is that it will actually slow down travel, especially in certain parts of Africa, including Rwanda and Uganda. And you'll start seeing a situation where there'll be a lot more screening for Ebola patients and passengers. So definitely, as far as air cargo is concerned, it plays a very important part in pharmaceuticals and also in the transportation of vaccines. Sustainability and green cargo, I really don't want to talk too much about it. There's a lot of discussions which have actually been had. And in the interest of time, what I will try and do is I will just touch on a very important part, which is the biggest problem that we're actually having today in the development of the air cargo sector is the policy and the regulatory reform. And this is really where we need to do something about it, because this is the single biggest unlock that we actually have for air cargo. And of course, SATM, the entire implementation process has to be fast-tracked because it's really taking too long. And one of the things that we'd like to appeal to to AFCAC and African Union is to actually try and fast-track some of the areas that we are actually facing slowdown in. Partnerships, again, we've talked a lot about partnerships today. We've talked about partnerships between African airlines. We need to talk about partnerships between African airlines and the foreign carriers, especially the ones from China and India. We need to also look at public-private partnerships with the shipping industry, and I really believe that the future of the air cargo sector really depends on how strongly we adopt partnerships. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation, and the way forward is to really look at three areas which is quite important, and the first one lies in the liberalization part, and this is something that is so important. Investment in infrastructure is also quite important, especially to the regions not like South Africa or Kenya, which are very well developed, but 80% of Africa's airports need cargo infrastructure. So this is an area where there has to be a lot of investment that is required, and also the fact that we also need to we need to digitalize the value chain and actually bring in a lot of technology. So finally, we want to now sort of call the governments to actually provide their support for the liberalization, for investments, and actually encouraging a fair and enabling environment. Airlines also have to collaborate and partner more with each other, and this is something which is readily available through AFRAA and through some of the other collaboration methods. And last but not the least, we also need more and more investors to actually invest in a lot of the areas that are actually coming up with a lot of opportunity, especially when it comes to logistics, and also to fund cold chain and e-commerce facilities. Just a quick update on who we are. Astral Aviation is a leading Pan-African cargo airline. We have a fleet of Boeing aircrafts. We operate to approximately 14 African destinations. In addition to that, our hub is in Nairobi. We also fly into the Middle East, Asia, and China. And in addition to that, we are working very, very closely with 8 African airlines who we collaborate with, and approximately 52 foreign carriers who we also work with. So this is the end of my presentation. And just in closing, if Africa is to trade, air cargo must lead. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. If anybody has any questions, you can reach out to me.